Well, welcome everyone to our Healing for Wellbeing webinar series from the New Beginning Center. We're really glad you joined us. I'm Sean Baker, co-owner and executive director, and your host for the series. So before we get started, I'd like to go over a few tips about how we can communicate with each other during these webinars. First off, you can move our talking heads anywhere on your screen to optimize your viewing pleasure. Please use the raise your hand feature to let me know if you're having an issue that needs immediate attention, like you can't see us or you can't hear us. Then there is the Q&A feature. Please use that for your questions. Feel free to submit your questions as they occur to you throughout the webinar. I'll be gathering and organizing them behind the scenes, and we'll either pause to address them during the webinar or wait till the end if that seems more appropriate. Feel free to use the chat feature to let us know your feedback about the webinar or to share any resources that might be helpful to all of us. And lastly, we'll be recording this webinar and the other two and send you a link to them when they're ready. So if you miss something, you can always go back and have another look at it. All right. So as Susan and I have been spending more than our usual amount of time together, working from home and sheltering in place, I thought, hey, let's figure out how to do webinars on Zoom. That'll be a fun new challenge. But seriously, we do see this as an opportunity to help explain what's been happening to all of us, to our minds, our bodies, and our relationships during this crisis, and to offer some tools that we can use for our own mental health, for our loved ones, and really for the well-being of our entire community. It's been through my own healing journey and those I've witnessed that I'm grateful to be part of creating a somatic healing center for trauma in Camarillo, California. At the center, we offer an intensive outpatient program for trauma and anxiety and an array of outpatient services that are designed to heal your nervous system, restore connection, and resilience.
So I can't forward the slides.
Well, that's a bit of a trouble. What happens when you, I just practiced that a minute ago. When you hit the down arrow?
Yeah. Up arrow, down arrow, side arrow.
Okay. I'm gonna step away for a second and sort this out.
Our first crisis. So we're going to take this opportunity. This is my plan for the whole webinar, is to take this opportunity to do experiential learning while Sean fixes the text. So just notice where you are in space. Find a way to kind of just observe. Are my feet on the floor? How am I breathing? And this will be part of how we, oh, good. We're back in business. So that'll be part of how I will encourage you to be listening, is listening with your whole body, noticing your feet on the floor, noticing your breath, just opening up those avenues for learning as we're, and for, you know, noticing information in your own system as we're learning about the nervous system through lecture as well. Go ahead, Sean.
Okay. So again, this is a little bit about who we are and the services that we offer. Can you move ahead to the next slide? Okay, super. We have an incredible team of practitioners, as you can see most of them here, each of which bring their passion, their creativity, humility, and unique talents as healers to their work with you. So we've created this series of webinars and ongoing online support groups to assist you with tools for well-being during this time of crisis. All of the details are available through our e-newsletter and also on our website. So today's webinar presenter is Susan Richter, who has been a certified trauma specialist for over 30 years. I feel so blessed with Susan's expertise on our team, her ability to really speak plainly about trauma and how to heal it, and her partnering me as co-owner at the center, and really most preciously as my wife. Susan?
Hi, everybody. So, it's interesting. This is like the perfect time to be learning about trauma because we all have perhaps more stress going on, and therefore we can tune into, and maybe a little bit more time to pause and notice our own symptoms of stress. And that's going to be what we're looking at as we're learning about trauma today, and noticing how do I use this data, my own noticing of my breath, what's happening in my body, what's happening with my stress level, to be able to know how to promote my resiliency and prevent trauma. And of course, that also has ramifications for how do we treat trauma. Today's agenda, we're going to cover all this stuff. And so I'm going to move ahead and get to it. So we have plenty of time, hopefully, for questions and answers at the end. So trauma is a response that happens in the nervous system. It's not in the event. It's not, oh, I lived through the COVID pandemic. It's what is my body experience of those moments of overwhelm or fear or disconnection that leave their residues in my functioning as time goes on, depending on the level of upset in the nervous system, the level of traumatic insult. What are those residues that are left, and how do we process those out of the system? How do we prevent them in the first place? But just to kind of keep in mind that really trauma is about what's happening in the body. It's not that thing that happened outside of me. That's simply the triggering experience. It leads to a sense of overwhelm, helplessness. There's a sense of loss of boundaries. I'm not in control. I kind of lose where I am in the community, in the environment. I'm disrupted. I'm not sure where safety is, etc. And so, and like I said, those trauma-related thoughts, feelings, and sensations can be stored or are stored in the body in a fragmented fashion. So this is the continuum of trauma. Stress is normal. We're built for stress. Our nervous system cranks up into fight or flight to fight off the danger at hand in our evolutionary heritage. The saber-toothed tiger, we're triggered instantly by our effective sympathetic nervous system into fighting or fleeing that danger, and then cycling down into parasympathetic rest, digest, recover, for then the next brief spurt of stress-induced danger signaling that I can then respond to out of this abundance of resiliency in the system. And that's, normal. Stress happens every day. I just cycle through in and out of stress response and then recovery. When I have more stress than my system has the capacity to handle and my system becomes dysregulated, that's called traumatic stress. And that's what I would say is really observable right now, which makes it a good time to be studying this, because we can feel it in our own systems. We can see it in others. We can, notice what happens when you turn on the TV, all these little opportunities to kind of notice, oh, this is more stressful, this experience of watching the news, this experience of, attending to social media. This is ratcheting up my nervous system more than it might have in normal times. And it gives us kind of a flavor for what's happening with like our frontline responders that are living in traumatic stress all the time, and therefore have more vulnerability to post-traumatic stress disorder, which would be that, snapshots or encapsulations of stressful events or experiences that get stored in the body as a way of coping. Chronic PTSD is either complex or chronic. It's that those experiences when I'm living in stress, say for example, growing up in child abuse, then I have this sort of lived experience of chronic stress, which creates really lifelong disabling, can impact immune function and vulnerability to disease, lifespan, etc. Here you can see it in another way, just this cascade towards chronicity that people, particularly growing up with abuse or experiencing life-threatening trauma, may fall into and requires treatment to heal and repair. Here are the symptoms of trauma: anxiety, all these things you can read. And you also might notice that this is what's going on right now in our culture. All of these symptoms of more stress in my system than I can manage. And sometimes it's kind of a, kind of playful or jokey about, the drinking or the eating or the, stress coping. And all of that is, normal, a normal response to stress. I'm going to try to figure out a way to cope. The problem that comes in terms of addictions is when that's the only button I have in my arsenal of how to manage stress. If my only coping tool is go for the alcohol or the food or yelling at somebody, that's going to be problematic for me in a lot of ways, and that can be part of an addictive process that gets rolling. These are the cognitive symptoms of trauma. So if I'm growing up in chronic trauma, if I'm growing up with abuse, then I might try to, survive. And one of the ways that we do that is by explaining away the danger. My body is registering danger. I'm not safe. My parents aren't safe. And my body, I can feel it in my tummy, I can feel it in my chest, I can feel it in my musculature. And I've got to figure out a way to manage that without going into chronic overwhelm or terror. So one way to do that is to self-blame. It must be me. What's going on that feels so scary, feels not okay, feels hurtful, must be my fault. I must be to, fill in the blank. Stupid, lazy, fat, whatever. And that's the way that we cope with this dissonance between how my body feels and the way that I have to figure out a way to stay safe, which is, if it's me, maybe I can fix it. Maybe I can control it. And the reality is with child abuse and neglect, it isn't something that one can control. But these mistaken beliefs and core irrational beliefs and negative self-talk all provide a protective explanation for something that is actually out of my control. And drama triangle is another way of looking at what happens in relationships, what happens in my internal relationship with myself, in my relationships with others, when I'm having this sort of experience of people aren't safe. And so I've got to be having this sort of braced response to connection. And therefore, I'm either feeling worried about when's the next attack or the next mean word or whatever it is. As the victim, I'm kind of always framing things in terms of, who's out to get me? How am I, hurting and suffering and struggling? And then cycling into the rescuer. We tend to play all of these roles if we play one of them. And rescuer stays super busy and super distracted by caring for others. And it's definitely a way of coping. that indicates that there's been something that has knocked this ability to feel safe in relationship out of balance and out of function. And then if ever we are feeling victimized or feeling like we have to fix things for others in order to be okay, we're going to cycle into persecutor, whether that's you know, aggressing against ourselves or aggressing against others. That's that fight instinct of resentment, frustration of others, etc. And it can, you know, of course, be actual persecutory behaviors, but more often it's also experienced as this sort of simmering resentment, or I'm having an argument in my brain with you, but I don't actually speak it. Those are all signs of this Cartman drama triangle that are hallmarks of this disrupted relationship with the self or with others that has at its underpinnings trauma. Somatic symptoms of trauma are all of these things. You can see ratcheting up in the first several, and then the bottom three are more this sympathetic, the parasympathetic freeze state and trying to recover. Again, these are defense responses. So our nervous system is trying to protect us from this perceived danger or perceived threat, and we go into all of the fight or flight, which is again sympathetic arousal, and then oscillating down into parasympathetic, hide, avoid, submit, dissociate. And this dissociation process is this way of disconnecting from the body so that I'm not as vulnerable to the abuse, neglect, the pain of whatever it is that I can't escape. And so we sort of check out from ourselves, use numbing devices, you know, drugs, alcohol, etc., as ways to kind of disconnect, dissociate, and not feel as much of the pain that is ever present. And now we're going to watch a little video about the amygdala.
We know you're really busy, so we're keeping it quick. It's the manager minute or two. Yeah.
We've all had conversations where we've left feeling like they just missed the mark. Why does this happen? Well, part of the reason has to do with our brain, specifically the amygdala. What's the amygdala, you ask? It's only Sarah's favorite part of the brain. The amygdala is the part of the brain that is constantly scanning your environment for threats so that it can move you into action so it can protect you. Those threats might be physical, mental, emotional, or even to our ego. One of the ways I like to think about the amygdala is to imagine it's this shaky little neurotic chihuahua. It's shaking and it's nervous and it's ready to bark at anything that it perceives as a threat. Some of us have more neurotic chihuahuas than others. So what does any of this have to do with conversations? When our amygdala is triggered, it hijacks our brain. It pumps our body and our brain full of these chemicals and hormones that shut down parts of our brain. So we lose access to things like logic and reasoning, problem solving, listening, and empathy. All things pretty important to building trust. So when my amygdala is triggered, or when your amygdala is triggered, there's no way we can connect and build trust in the same way as when we're calm. So what do you do if you notice the amygdala has been hijacked in you or the other person? That is a really good time to step away, take a breath, and regroup when both parties have had a chance to breathe. Here's your challenge. I want you to do an amygdala audit. Think about a time when you had a stress response and think about what did it feel like when you were going through that. Because the more aware you are about your response, the more likely you can catch it when it's happening in the moment. Or you're more likely to notice it in someone else. And remember, play fully brave. Did you find this helpful? Like, subscribe, and share with others. And if you're looking for more leadership tips, sign up for updates at sarahnoelwilson.com and follow me on social media. Thanks for watching. Now get back to work.
We know you're really...
Here it is. Okay. So That's the dilemma, is that when we're in that amygdala hijack, we're not able to connect because safety is primary. And so you can see in this little cartoon how if I'm scanning for danger, I can't really pay attention to what the other person is trying to communicate or what's going on, which is that disruption in connection that is the result of the trauma response. Uh-oh, I'm not going, Sean. Help, help, help. Sean. So now we're going to take another opportunity to breathe and just notice your feet on the floor. Wiggle your toes a little bit. Notice your body in the chair or wherever it is that you're resting. Just observe your breath and see if you can offer yourself a fuller, deeper breath. Letting that breath inflate your belly, expand your diaphragm, and then gently exhale and notice what happens as you do that. As you just turn your attention inward and you notice your breath, slowly breathing in through your nostrils, feeling the coolness of the in-breath, and then releasing that breath through your lips, your soft jaw. Just drop your jaw a little bit as you exhale and notice what happens next. You just gently observe as we breathe in and then out. Perhaps you become aware of areas of your body where you're holding more tension than you need to. And you can just softly offer perhaps more rest to those muscles that are held in chronic tension. Releasing, like I said, your jaw, shoulders rolled back and down. Just really notice, listen to your body in this moment and notice if there's any way that you could release, relax, settle more deeply into the support beneath you so that you're carrying less tension in this moment. It's kind of a lovely opportunity to just release, listen on more levels than just with your just your eyes or your ears, but really feel into how your body is resting. I promise there's no test after this, so you can just really take your ease throughout this webinar and see the process for yourself as you open your nervous system to receiving more information than when we hold ourselves tightly or tensely. So in this slide, we're looking at the nervous system, and this is Dan Siegel's view of the biphasic roller coaster. That's really helpful in helping us notice this red zone and of hyperarousal and all the symptoms of hyperarousal in that fight-flight section of the nervous system. This is the sympathetic nervous system. The green zone is the range of resilience. This is where our neocortex is open and available, and we're not scanning for danger, and we can connect with others, and we can learn and grow and change. And that's really what we're wanting to keep wide, is this range of resilience. I want a nice, expansive green zone so I can manage the natural stressors that come up in life, the stress that comes up every single day, and particularly in a time of extreme stress as we're going through now. Super important to be able to notice, when do I move out of range of resilience and how do I get myself back? This blue zone is hypoarousal. That's representing the freeze capacity in the nervous system, the when the parasympathetic is exhausted and you go into this freeze state. And this is where disengagement, numbing out, difficulty in tracking conversations, all these symptoms of hypoarousal. And you can see the up and down of the line in that range of resilience is, normal, getting revved up, handling the stress in my everyday life, and then calming down. And it goes on all day long throughout our day. And then noticing these arrows where if my green zone is maxed out, if I have too many hits to the system, too much stress in the system, I'm more likely to pass straight through the green zone from hypoarousal right into hyper and then straight down. So I'm thinking about our first line workers right now, folks that really are struggling to do their job and feel any kind of safety. And so their nervous systems are being overtaxed on a daily basis when they're going into working in the grocery stores, working in the hospitals, homeless people, people in prisons, where their ability to find safety may be very, very stressed, maybe very, very difficult, and yet they're still, have a job to do, have to struggle to find shelter for folks in homeless situations. And so you can see how they might just cycle between this, I'm at work, I'm doing my job, I'm trying to figure out a way to stay safe, and then I get home and I collapse. I'm out of contact with others, maybe by necessity. And this sense of numbness, isolation, feeling alone, all of those things one might expect would be more present. And those folks that are over in that really stressful work situation or life situation might be cycling in this way that is really, really hard on the system, impacts immune function, impacts longevity. All those things are connected to healthy functioning nervous system. So you can see how those spiky lines are the pathway of life for someone in chronic stress. And that's what we see often in folks with chronic PTSD, is that they have very little green zone, very little moments in their day when they're feeling good, feeling peaceful, feeling connected to their bodies, because they're in this more spike way of living, oscillating between extremes of hyper and hypoarousal. So in healing trauma, we're really wanting to employ the abilities to work not only with those brain cognitions, with the thoughts, with the behaviors, what am I doing, how am I doing it, our good ability to self-observe and analyze and make good choices. We're wanting to work on those and utilize those abilities, but we're also needing to reconnect into the body for folks that have had to disconnect as a way of surviving. So reconnecting with the felt sense of present moment experience is an important way that we also need to be working with trauma, because we can't heal trauma if we're disembodied. We can't heal trauma if we're dissociated. So we have to find out easy, gentle ways to reconnect with the body. And that's a really important part of trauma healing, is finding ways back in to the body that feel safe enough. Looking at how the brain functions, our sense of safety comes from is housed in the brainstem. That's our most primitive evolutionary structure of the brain. And so that's that sense of is it safe? And if it's not safe, I freeze. And that's that most primitive part of our survival system. In our brains, we have also developed the limbic system, which is the center of emotion, where we are able to then notice emotions as a way of staying safe. Danger is fear or anger, what's needed, what's going on, sadness, all of these kinds of awareness of emotion housed in the limbic system are just ways of trying to figure out what's going on and how do I take care of myself based on that information in that in the amygdala. And then the most evolved part of the brain is the neocortex, and that's where we're able to think, learn, discern. We come up with explanations for why is this happening. And so when the brain stem signals danger, the limbic system is like, how hot, how dangerous, how scary. And then the neocortex like gets to scan, look around, is it happening now? If it's not happening now, then the neocortex can send the message back down the system of, it's not happening now. And so we can calm down. Or it is happening now and we need to, you know, fight or flee the saber-toothed tiger or whatever it is that's presenting. All right, and so we've talked a little bit about this, that repeated trauma in childhood certainly impacts the development of self and the development of self-perception, because I have to develop these defense responses as a way of surviving the terror of living in an unsafe situation day after day, living with people that I'm supposed to be able to love and trust that are not loving and not trustworthy. So that's certainly going to create that dissonance between what my body is experiencing and what my brain has to come up with as a way of explaining away the constant anxiety. In the second bullet point, in adulthood, severe traumas can cause a deterioration in the level of subsequent functioning. And so that reminds me of, you know, our our forefront responders who are out there working and maybe previous to the pandemic were doing fine, and we may see a lot of residual trauma because of that stress on the nervous system of constantly going out into perceived or real actual danger every single day, and the wear and tear that that takes on the system. And then Besser-van der Kolk's hypothesis about this fixation at the developmental level of trauma, so that when that trauma is going on, we may not be able to attend to the tasks, the normal developmental tasks of that stage of life. And for example, in adolescence, there's a lot of developmental tasks of figuring out what do I want to do with my life, figuring out my sexuality, figuring out how do I relate to others, how do I make friends, how do I communicate myself to others, how do I do that? And so all of those developmental tasks may be delayed or underachieved, because if that adolescent is in a life-threatening situation, they're worried about getting through the day, figuring out how to avoid imminent danger, threat. So in neglect and abuse, you'll see this developmental arrest, where that child or that adolescent or that adult is busy trying to stay alive, busy trying to get through the day, and can't take on those bigger challenges of those developmental tasks. Thanks. So now we're going to be watching about how the brain changes, But take this moment to feel your feet on the floor. Again, be aware of your breath and see if you can widen, drop in to a deeper breath. Feel your feet on the floor. Wiggle your toes, wiggle your fingers. Reconnect with your body in this moment.
Not so long ago, many scientists believed that the brain did not change after childhood, that it was hardwired and fixed by the time we became adults. But recent advances in only the last decade now tell us that this is simply not true. The brain can and does change throughout our lives. It is adaptable, like plastic. Hence, neuroscientists call this neuroplasticity. How does neuroplasticity work? If you think of your brain as a dynamic, connected power grid, there are billions of pathways or roads lighting up every time you think, feel, or do something. Some of these roads are well-traveled. These are our habits, our established ways of thinking, feeling, and doing. Every time we think in a certain way, practice a particular task, or feel a specific emotion, we strengthen this road. It becomes easier for our brains to travel this pathway. Say we think about something differently, learn a new task, or choose a different emotion. We start carving out a new road. If we keep traveling that road, our brains begin to use this pathway more, and this new way of thinking, feeling, or doing becomes second nature. The old pathway gets used less and weakens. This process of rewiring your brain by forming new connections and weakening old ones is neuroplasticity in action. The good news is that we all have the ability to learn and change by rewiring our brains. If you have ever changed a bad habit or thought about something differently, you have carved a new pathway in your brain and experienced neuroplasticity firsthand. With repeated and directed attention towards your desired change, you can rewire your brain.
Great, thanks. Alrighty, and taking a nice deep breath, we will continue on. So you can see in this slide that this is what we're working on when we're trying to heal trauma, when we're trying to prevent trauma. We're wanting to access these positive experiences of joy and play. I want to replace the negative cognitions, the negative self-talk with more truthful, more accurate, positive ones. Sometimes the way that we do that, and I think I like this sort of little chutes and ladders idea, because we're literally having to pick up the marble from one place in the brain and drop it down another pathway in order to create those new neural pathways towards the resources of how to feel better. Because otherwise, the marble's just going to go down those rabbit holes that are already well excavated towards the trauma encapsulation or memory or flashback or whatever it is. It's so well worn that we have to use our first self-awareness. What's going on? Am I getting stuck in a negative looping system? Can I pick up that marble and drop it down a different pathway? And one of the ways that you might think of that is, what would I say to a friend? If I catch myself saying something harsh or negative to myself, what would I say to a friend? Or can I imagine someone who loves me unconditionally and what they might say to me? And these are the ways to begin to rewire those automatic ways of thinking that are ultimately not helpful and often self-destructive. We're using coming into the present moment. So noticing, can I feel my feet on the floor? Can I notice a moment of feeling solid, centered, grounded, present in this moment? And as you do that right now, just notice, is there any, as I'm noticing my breath, I'm feeling my feet on the floor, where in my body do I feel solid, centered, present, and grounded, even if it's only the size of a grain of sand? And just see if you can scan in to that place that maybe feels better. We're kind of used to, and again, this is that neural looping towards pain or distress. Oh, I always feel tense here, or I always feel bad about this, right? And so it goes there automatically very, very quickly. We want to pick up that marble, drop it down. Where does it feel better? How do I offer myself something that feels a little bit better? How do I give myself that moment to check in with where I can feel present in this moment? How do I bring myself back to the present moment and notice, is this fear, anger, upset happening in this moment? Or am I creating it with my thought processes? And when we are, rescuing our nervous system in this way, we're then allowing ourselves to have more green zone bandwidth for healthy connection with others that ultimately is, what's going to help us with our ability to feel connected, feel safe, and feel nurtured and loved. So trauma robs the victim of power and control. And so we want to find ways to help ourselves feel safe. A good first step is to just notice, is it happening now? There may be all kinds of things that I can be afraid about, particularly at this time in our lives, all kinds of things that I can think about. Is it happening now in this moment? If it's not happening now in this moment, can I give myself a break in this moment? There may be other times that I do want to think about, the future. How am I going to manage? What am I going to do? Those are all good things to be thinking about when my nervous system is rested and I have that good green zone capacity to really utilize my good thinking brain to figure out problems and solve them. But when I'm activated, when I'm in that red zone or hypoarousal, the blue zone, I don't want to be trying to figure out my life in that moment because it won't go well. So really noticing, if I'm having, recurring worry thoughts, can I come back to the present moment? Can I turn off the TV, give myself a break for a moment, and just drop in to my breath, into my body. And we're going to do another breathing resource for you in this moment. It's called heart breathing. And what we're doing is we're just inhaling and imagining that good inhalation coming in from the sky, from the heavens, holding that breath in all four chambers of the heart, breathing in from the earth, receiving all the blessings from Mother Earth as we inhale through the soles of our feet, up into all four chambers of the heart. So we're receiving breath from the heavens and up from the earth at the same time, holding in the heart center, and then releasing that breath on an exhalation to myself, to those I care for, to those I'm concerned about, to all the people of the world, the animals, the living beings. Like, we can really expand it out as we connect with our breath, our heart, and extending that breath Breathing that out, that good heart energy to anyone we wish for their nourishment and well-being. And just notice as you do this, take a little bit of time. Breathing in, holding in the heart center, exhaling that good, warm heart breath to yourself. Flowing out compassion to others. And just notice what happens in your nervous system as you do this little exercise. Notice what happens as you bring yourself to the present moment. All of these are little safety tools for increasing resilience in the nervous system and helping ourselves through difficulty so that we're not living in fight or flight, which has such a high cost of wear and tear in our brain and our body. So somatic attachment therapy is another modality that we use at our center to help heal attachment disruptions that have occurred in early years of development through trauma. And it's really in those early years of development that our nervous system becomes set towards this healthy nervous system response system. So, and that really impacts effective self-regulation for the lifespan. So we're wanting to go back in and re-heal whatever disruptions didn't happen for somebody, or the disruptions that happened and the trauma that needs to be healed. We're going back in using somatic attachment therapy as a way of healing that trauma. This is a really good picture of of good attachment happening, where we're you know, we come into this world with the neurobiology for attachment. We're built for connecting and using that sense of safe nurture, safe connection, feeling loved, cared for, all of our needs met. And that sets up the hardwiring in our nervous system for smooth function throughout the lifespan. And if that didn't happen, then we need to heal it through going back into that dormant neurobiology and rewiring the brain towards healthy attachment. And sometimes we use the therapeutic relationship, working with animals, both our own relationships with pets, but also imaginary, using our good creative brain to imagine, you know, that loving relationship where we are nurtured and cared for, perhaps by spiritual beings, by one's faith system. We just bring all of that fits for that individual to rewire that brain towards safe connection. And sometimes, if it hasn't been wired in the first place, we need to allow that wiring to get completed. Somatic experiencing is another trauma processing modality that helps us just tune in the way that we've been doing in this webinar, to just notice the present moment experience of breath, of what happens in my body as I breathe. Really tuning into those sensations that help me feel better. And using that to widen out the green zone so that I have more and more capacity to tolerate what I have in my brain, in my body, and increase the capacity to tolerate and to feel comfortable and to orient towards what feels better. We've done, excuse me, a few of these breathing exercises. These are all interventions that we're using. It's sort of building that toolkit of stress coping. So I don't just have you know, the food, the alcohol, the, you know, the whatever it is that we're using. But we also have all these other ways. Again, it's that broadening that repertoire, so I don't just have one stress coping skill. I have this broad repertoire, and I can use a variety and notice what's needed for a given moment. So let's practice ocean breathing. That's just breathing in rhythm with the ocean. So imagine an ocean wave. I breathe in. I let it go. Again, dropping the jaw, noticing any tension in your body, and just releasing it on that good exhalation. And again, imagining the wave rolls in, the wave rolls out. Deepening, slowing down, one breath following another. Just notice what happens in your own body as you just focus on that, observing your breath flowing in and flowing out, just like ocean waves. And you can perhaps be noticing without judgment any thoughts, any judgments, any distractions. That happens all the time. Just bring yourself back to your breath. And in that way, we are doing that good work of neuroplasticity, of helping to expand the ability to drop into the relaxation response, rather than constantly feeling like that hamster on the hamster wheel, where I'm kind of a victim of my racing thoughts. We don't have to be. We can draw our brain attention, our good intentional attunement to come back to my breath. Oh, I get distracted. Come back to the breath. And that's just a really nice way to use self-compassion and intentionality to rewire your brain and rewire your nervous system towards healthier functioning. Comprehensive resource model is another trauma processing modality that we use at the center. And the primary goal is, again, this attachment work towards healing the attachment disruptions that prevent us from having this right relationship to the self, this ability to self-nurture, the ability to self-love, self-care. And because of that early experience of trauma and having to sort of explain away the disruption in the nervous system, the disruption in the sense of safety by self-blaming, that's where that gets disrupted, and that needs to be healed. And this model really helps to complete all that neurobiology towards compassionate self-regard and self-care. And the way that this model works is to provide a scaffolding of resources so that that amygdala hijack is really secured. We aren't allowing that amygdala to run away with itself. We're really using all kinds of neurobiological resource stabilizers to secure the nervous system and that amygdala to be calm in the face of reorganizing those early traumatic memories, those encapsulated experiences, those flashback experiences, so that I can tolerate all the information I have in my body without cycling into those rabbit holes of flashback, upset, distress that can't be tolerated. We're widening out that green zone so that it can be tolerated. And that's the way that we process trauma using that model. And this is the goal. So I'm ready for questions. We'll move on to that as soon as you've had a chance to take a look at this. This is what we're working towards, is a nervous system that's balanced. And then I have so many more options and choices for how I want to manage my life. All right. Oops, too far. Questions? Sean, do you have a question? Does anybody have a question for me?
I have a couple of questions. Can you hear me?
I can.
So a couple questions about the breath work. Basically, how does this work when you are triggered?
With intentionality. Very difficult, right? It's impossible to have a panic attack and do deep diaphragmatic breathing at the same time. And so, but if I wait until I'm in the middle of a panic attack, pretty difficult to steer that thought towards breathe diaphragmatically, just breathe. I'm not having a heart attack. It's going to be tough. That's going to be harder. So that's why this is an opportunity to notice, you know, when we're living with increased stress, super good opportunity to notice these more subtle moments of, I turn on the TV and what do I notice in my body? So that we can begin to attune and catch it earlier. The key to not having a panic attack is to catch it way early and do the breathing then. Or better yet, just employ deep breathing as a regular part of my day. I just drop in. I notice that my shoulders are tight. I drop in and breathe. I notice my jaw is tight. I drop in and breathe. I notice I'm having a conversation. I drop in and breathe. I notice I don't have to be doing something while I'm listening to a webinar. I drop in and breathe. And that's the way that we're increasing green zone.
And Susan, did you go over earth breathing?
I didn't.
Could you?
It takes a little bit more time. It's easy to look up. Google earth breathing, comprehensive resource model. But I want to just make sure that I get to all the questions first.
Sure. I've got a couple that are a little bit more specific. One is someone who's working with victims of human trafficking.
Huh?
And when they get triggered, she tries some grounding techniques with using our senses. And will that be helpful and work for those folks?
Yes and no. So it's that thing that I was talking about earlier about coming back into the body that has been the scene of the trauma. So if my body has been unsafe, it's going to, you know, the flashing red lights are going to go off when I have any, you know, relaxation into any breath work. It's going to be scary potentially for folks where their body has been the scene of the traumatic experience, which is all of our bodies. So so we have to go slowly, and we just look for those moments, like that little moment when I have a felt sense of better, when we're looking for that little grain of sand of, you know, feeling solid, centered, present, or grounded. We're looking for those moments. And it might not, I might not even use the word breath. If somebody has a real fear response, a trigger response to breathing, I'm not going to use that word. I'm going to go in so soft and so slow with, can they feel their feet flat on the floor, right? Can you do that? Can you wiggle your toes? What do you notice when you do that? What happens when we make eye contact? What happens when you look away? Those little oscillations give us a whole window into capacity to tolerate just a titch more of connection, but always steering towards what feels better, what feels better, what feels better, rather than pushing through what feels worse.
Then I've got another, I'm going to clump these questions together kind of from a parental point of view or a caregiver point of view for children. they're okay during the day, but they are crying or refusing to go to sleep at night when it's bedtime. And, trying to read a book or a stuffed animal doesn't seem to be creating enough safety. Do you have any other things that we can use for little ones to help them with feeling more calm and regulated?
Yeah, that's such a multifaceted question. The first thing is, how did they get worn out during the day? With my kids, it's like, did we give them enough ways to run around the house like crazy earlier in the day so that they get their good little systems, burning off some of that energy. And so that combined with a really regular routine bedtime ritual of, bath and a little massage and a little story and a little cocoa and a little, we just want to have a super lovely evening ritual that their little systems start getting acclimatized to, and get that good. I mean, and it's tough when you're homebound. How do you let kids run around like crazy? But that's really, their little systems need to do that in balance. And so I would think that both of those things might be, good to try.
And even so, the children are having nightmares almost every night. And what might be some additional ways to assist?
Additional ways is notice your own nervous system. So they're little sponges. I mean, we're all little sponges, but particularly for little ones, they're sponging up our nervous system activity. And so, using the breath, teaching them how to breathe. Everybody gets to learn how to breathe, and we lay down and we feel into where it feels better, and is there a cuddly blanket, and we practice that. And just notice, what do I have on in the background? Is there stuff going on that is scary to them? How's my voice tone? What happens when I get stressed? Because they're going to vibe all that, and whether they understand it or not, it doesn't matter. Their systems are taking it all in, and their little systems then are having to hold it. So we want to give them, noticing both, give them ways to release through art, through, running around, through play, but also feed the system less tension and stress by noticing what's going on in the environment.
Okay, can you advance the slide?
And the other thing about that is that, if you have a kid that's in chronic stress and exhibiting, stress response, nightmares nightly, difficulty, they reach out for telehealth for sure, because early intervention is worth a lot.
So during this time of sheltering in, we have online drop-in support groups. Our regular eating disorder recovery support group is continuing online on Wednesdays, and we've added a new group for resources and reconnecting support led by our clinical director, Angela Riculi. And then on Fridays, we've started a new group called Queer Space for LGBTQIA community support, and that'll be continuing. Again, we'll be continuing these groups through the duration, even after things continue to change. And more details and Zoom links for those 3 groups are available at our website. And then next week, Susan, can you?
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Next week, I'll be both your host and presenter of working with the part 2 of the body, how we use movement for healing trauma, how trauma impacts your body, and additional tools for healing. And then in